Hi, welcome everybody to How I Write a First Draft with Mary Grand. My name is Anna. I'll be hosting this evening, but Mary, it's so lovely to have you here with us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's very exciting.
I'm very excited. So before we kick off, we've got loads of stuff to get through. Can you just tell us, if someone's never met you or hasn't read any of your books, doesn't know anything about you, what are the important things they need to know about you before we get on with it?
Right, well, I'm Mary and I live on the Isle of Wight. I have written 5 novels now and 2 collections of short stories. My first 3 books were indie published. I published them myself, and I'm now working with the publisher Boldwood Books. My first 3 books would I think be called women's fiction, and I'm now writing a whodunit.
Lovely. Really exciting. So we're going to kind of cover loads of stuff tonight. So we're going to start off with just what got you into writing. How did you start writing?
Yeah, I came to it late, really. I didn't start until I was about 51. I'm 63 now, so I've not been writing that long compared to
That's so encouraging for like older writers.
Yeah, but I think that's why I'm telling you all my age, because I think writing is just one of these wonderful things that in many ways you've got different things to share at different ages, and every age has its pluses, really. I was about 50 and I'd gone through quite a lot of I think in common with a lot of women my age, looking after elderly people and various family things. And anyway, I suddenly came to a halt when I was 50 and everything got a bit much. And I think in the old days it was kind of a breakdown, really. I just couldn't cope with anything, so I stopped all my outside activities. I had a lovely doctor and a lovely therapist who helped me through that year, really. And I was feeling a lot better by the end of that year and wondering what to do. And I saw a class advertised up at the local college here on the island with Felicity Fair Thompson, and she was doing a course on creative writing. So I went to it, really nervous, and it was the first time I'd really been out of the house. My husband actually had to drive me because I still wasn't driving. But Felicity was absolutely amazing, incredibly positive, and I still all the time think of things she taught me on that. In fact, I loved her course so much I did it again the second year.
That's an endorsement.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, she's just such a lovely lady. She's on the island. She's a writer herself, and she's a prolific writer herself. So I went to her classes, and during that time I started writing my first novel, which was Free to Be Tegan. And like most people, I think, with their first novel, a lot of it was based on my experience. And my experience had been being brought up in a strict religious cult. And so but I wrote a novel. It's not a biography. That was all too close. But by writing about somebody else and distancing it slightly. So that was my first novel. Then I went on to write 2 more novels, like women's fiction novels, really. After that, and then I started working with Boldwood.
Ah, lovely. And so you self-published or indie published those first 3. Can you tell us much about the process there?
Well, I'm really untacky, incredibly untacky, but I'm very fortunate to have a husband who likes computer stuff, and my son and daughter do as well. And so I was writing and he did, and I had friends who were my beta readers. And then, and also, of course, I was still partly doing the course. I did various courses. There's some really good courses out there. I did one with Curtis Brown. I did another one, the publisher, they do one that you pay for. And I did another one with a writing magazine, actually, which is called Writing Your First Novel. Okay. And I had an absolutely gorgeous lady who I was working with. She's a writer herself, and we're still in touch and everything. She's lovely. And she saw how far I'd gone along. So she just, basically, I sent her chapters each week and she went through them. And it was just, so I was learning all the time. That was while I was indie. And then my husband and I looked on Amazon, and we put it onto the Amazon I think it's KDP, and it's very apparently it's very straightforward. Somebody, Diane Kimpton, I know it's around. She's really good at this sort of thing. But between us, he formatted it. They help you with everything, and it doesn't cost anything. So my first book didn't cost me anything to put up on Amazon or to have in paperback, because I went on to something called print on demand. So right from the first day it went up, it could be on Kindle or on paperback. And
brilliant. So there was no like initial massive cost for you?
No cost at all.
No.
Not at all. The cover we made ourselves. Amazon will provide you with some templates, but my husband was able to work out the cover for me. And so that's how we did it. I mean, you can do it with help. There's lots of people out there helping now with indie publishing, and you just need to be really careful that you get somebody who's charging the right amount, not going to charge masses amount for something that you could probably do yourself.
And then earlier on you mentioned I'm never sure if it's beta readers or beta readers, I'm not sure. But you mentioned them, and Liz has just asked how many of them would you recommend having look at your book?
Yeah, now I think it's an interesting one, beta readers. I mean, it's a big job you're asking people to do, and I find actually I probably have about 3 or 4, and each one has a different strength really. Some people are really good at the grammar and the spelling and that sort of thing. They are worth their weight in gold because my spelling is terrible. And then there's other people who are really plot orientated, and they can give you ideas about plots. So you need to look at like, I would say half my beta readers were people who liked women's fiction, but like my husband wouldn't normally read women's fiction, but he's very hot on all the grammar-y things, so he did some of that. I got my kids to read it as well.
Always handy.
Yeah, well, you need to have a balance of the people who are going to be gentle, and maybe 1 or 2 people who are going to be a little bit sort of not honest, because I'm sure your work will be lovely, but you need the people who will actually give you the sort of more sort of stricter feedback as well. So you need both really. Yeah,
and it's nice to have a broad group, isn't it? Sort of.
Yeah, it is. I would advise it. Yeah, a nice broad group of people really, if you can find them. Yeah.
Nice. So you self-published or indie published those first 3 books, and then you signed with Boldwood. Can you tell us sort of how that came about and sort of
Yeah, that was amazing really. I'd written my novels, and I suddenly thought what I've always wanted to do was write a whodunit, because I've always read loads and loads of Agatha Christie's since I was tiny, and I've always been too scared to do it. And I thought, oh, blow it, let's have a go. And so I wanted to combine like women's fiction in the sense, when I say women's fiction, to me, it's not like books for women. It's a book about a female character being at the heart of my book, or it's about things that I think particularly women will relate to maybe, but I have lots of male readers as well, which is lovely. And anyway, so I still have a woman in crisis at the heart of my whodunit really, and then there are a woman who goes into a situation and they end up solving a murder as well as sorting out some of the things in their own life. Anyway, I wrote the whodunit and I sent it off to a few people, and I thought, well, never mind, because I got a few rejections, and I thought, well, I by then, by having to put up 3 books myself and the anthologies, and I'd been on a lot on social media, I had such a lovely group of people who were enjoying reading my books. I was really lucky, and I thought, well, that's fine, I'll put it up for them because I think they might enjoy it, see what they make of something different. And I was a week away from doing that when I heard from Boldwood, who seemed very excited about it, and they said, we'd like to work with you. And so I was given a contract with them to write whodunit set on the Isle of Wight. So that I said to Anna before when we were chatting, it was a bit like the universe calling my bluff and saying, go on then. This is serious now, you've got deadlines and things. So yeah, it's been very different, but great. Love it.
And when you say it's been different, like how has it been? Obviously you've kind of got a team now, I'm
Yeah,
guessing, and
at
sort of, yeah.
first I thought, oh my life, there's all these people doing something. I'm not having to pay, but there's people editing my book. I have professional people doing my covers. Suddenly I was told what the title of my book, well, they say they suggest the title of my book, but I mean, it was such a good
Suggest.
title. Yeah, and anyway, it was a brilliant title. I mean, these people know where they're at, they know exactly what they're doing, and it is wonderful to be in the safe pair of hands, because I think now there are so many books out there coming out every day, and if you've got a team behind you who know about the marketing and things, it doesn't mean you don't have to do any. In fact, I wouldn't say I do a lot less, but it does mean that you have these people who are very experienced behind you. On the other hand, it's probably more stressful. I think you have to, I have to write a book a year. It has to be in. And there's people who write more than that, actually. So so there are stresses as well, and you're very aware of not wanting to let anybody down, and hoping that people will think you're doing well enough and all that sort of thing. And you have to sort of, but fortunately we have a really nice author group on Facebook, and I've actually got to know a couple of people really well, and we have little chats and things, so it makes it a bit more sort of less scary, really. And my editor Sarah is just lovely, and if she picks up that I'm having a massive panic somewhere on the way, she sends me a little email, says don't panic.
It's so funny, isn't it? We tell ourselves, don't we, as soon as I get a deal, all my problems will be over. But then imposter syndrome sort of creeps in from
it's the same. It's all about the writing at the end of the day, and you will have the same doubts and the same ups and downs with a publisher as you do when you're indie, and you'll still be trying to not look at reviews, but you look at them and you try not to cry about them. You might cry about them and you might be really happy, and you try to stay on this even keel, but it's it's the same thing, really. It's keeping yourself writing and motivated.
Oh, lovely. So let's talk a bit about your process of how you write a book. So if we go like right from the start, before you even start writing, how do you even like start thinking about writing?
Well, it's sort of a mixture, but there's two things I would say that sort of go hand in hand. Because I have been asked to write whodunit set on the island, I will start thinking of where I want to set a book, but I also start thinking of character and murder, the murder to be. So I would say I start off with setting probably more than I used to, because they have to be set here, and there's so many lovely places. And then the new one, the island, is set at Brook Beach and around Brook. So what I tend to do is I use real names, but then I change things as well, so that actually I don't always use the name of the place. Anyway, you won't ever recognize, because it's not based on any real people, but it's the places that you'll recognize, not the people.
And how do you find like readers, how do they react, particularly if they do come from the Isle of Wight or they know the Isle of Wight well? Do you ever have any of those comments like, oh, that's not what that road name was? Or
no, not really. I think
good.
Because I tend to keep it well with Brook. It was quite I used the village, the church at the top, and then the beach, so there wasn't too much, and I do change names if I've changed the geography of a bit. Maybe I've changed a bit of a village or something, the geography, then I will change the name of that village slightly. So because I wouldn't call something it was something, and then I've changed it drastically.
We've had a really interesting question from Emily that says, do you feel like constrained to not show any aspects of the Isle of Wight in a bad light?
That's an interesting.
Do you feel like you need to be really positive about it, or
Well, no, I don't actually. I think it's actually really, I think for me, I think people appreciate the fact that I don't just make it a glossy sort of idyll. I think it's important that people know that on the island we have social problems, we have poverty, we have problems with drugs, we have we have a prison, we have all the same things. And sometimes I feel like it's a bit of a microcosm rather than, I know lots of people say, oh, it's like 50 years ago, sort of. There are things that make the island so unique and special, the scenery, the community, and those things, you know, I just write about because they're just lovely and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. But I think it's the right thing to do, to say actually there are other aspects of living on an island as well that can be difficult. And I think I've never had a complaint. I think people say, oh yeah, that is hard actually. And it is a nuisance, you know, when it rains and you can't get off the island because all the red jets are off because of the wind. You know, that can be really difficult. And I think that's okay. I think that's a whole picture of the place.
Oh, I really like that. That's a great answer. So when you've got your idea, you said you started with setting and character, and how does character kind of form?
Yeah, I think character really is what it's all about. I think if people are going to care about your book, they're going to care about the characters. And if they care about the characters, they'll care about your book. And we all know those things we watched on telly, and you think, oh, I don't know whether I even care enough now to watch the next one. And it's usually because of the people. And I think you need to think carefully about your character. For me, it'd be like, I tend to have one protagonist. I know a number of people have 2, 3, but I tend to have one protagonist, one main character who I think about. And when I started writing, I thought, right, I have to know this person inside out before I can write my book. And I downloaded all these things off the internet about, you know, what they had for breakfast and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, I can't do any of this. And I felt a real failure. I thought, I don't know my character very well. And I discovered really the best way to get to know your characters is to start writing about them. And I am somebody who plots and outlines a book, but at the same time, I do admit that character, I will get an outline of my character, because in a sense, your type of book will be dictated by your character. I was reading, like in Pride and Prejudice, if Elizabeth Bennet had been shy and retiring, you wouldn't have Pride and Prejudice. So and Harry Potter, he has to be a muggle and all that sort of thing. So there will be basic things you need. Like for me, I will have to decide whether I want somebody who lives on the island, somebody coming into, like in The Island, the books I've just read, they are an island family, and she's been away and she's coming back, and that affects the whole dynamic of the story, and their ages and all those things directly affect your plot. So you get to know as much, you know, get a good idea of the person. I do remember, I've just remembered, I heard Anne Cleese talking at the Isle of Wight Literary Festival, and she was saying how she always struggled with character, and until she wrote Vera. And she said Vera came out to her fully formed, and she said she always felt that was a real gift because it was like this fully formed character.
Oh, how lovely.
It does happen. If you're lucky, it happens. Sometimes I find I'm writing, and then when I'm writing, I'm thinking, that's when I say I plot, you see, I plot, then I start writing, and then I think, oh, they wouldn't do that. So then I have to replot. So I go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But at least with a plot, I've got an idea of where I'm roughly going to start.
Vaguely. Laura's asked a great question. Do you ever imagine what actors would play your characters if they made a TV or film version? And if so, who? But also, do you find that helpful? Like, I know that personally, I very rarely have an actual picture of a person, but do you work from that model?
I do have, funnily enough, the book I just finished today. See the grey hairs I've dyed. The central character in that, I saw, I happened to catch Gavin and Stacey. She's a Welsh girl who comes to the island. Now, she's not Stacey, but there's something about her that is a bit of Stacey.
Okay.
So I'll get bits. I read somewhere that you never just take one person anyway. You put all sorts of bits and pieces into them. So as for who'd be them on telly, or on a film, I'm not sure really.
Do you have any kind of like dream people that you're like, if they could star in a retelling of it, or that's who you
Um,
want?
I've got favourite actresses, and thing is, somebody like Brenda Blethyn, who I adore, she's probably a bit older than most of my main characters, but I just love her. I love Serene Jones, who's in Dr. Foster. I like her. She was in the battle in my mind with this new character. So you can't believe this, a mixture of Stacey and Serene Jones. Doesn't make sense, does it? But she's there as well. And I love her acting. So yeah. Oh, somebody else loves her as well. I think she would actually be really good for my new book. But anyway.
Yeah. But you do sort of sometimes I've just read a book and it had an amazing main character, the male main character, and he was so like bubbly and fun, and I was like, that's so lovely, I really want to capture something of that going forward. And you do kind of pick these bits you either think, oh, I love that, or oh, I hate that, and kind of like pick and choose to make people.
And then sometimes you start off with one idea, and as you're writing the book they change and they develop. I've got a vet in this new book I'm writing. So I keep writing about the new book I've written, which nobody can see yet. But that's
it's great.
Sorry, it's the one in my head. But I had one, and I imagined him very much like David Tennant to begin with, but he's got less glamorous as life's gone on. But you start off with ideas, don't you?
Got more craggy.
Yes.
So you said you've got your setting, your character, and then you said you often have women in crisis. So do you kind of think about that crisis as before you start writing? Is that kind of where you spring from, or?
Well, actually, let me have a look here. I said with character, I think one of the most important things about your character is their flaw. Because the flaw is the thing that people are going to say, oh, I know what it's like to be cripplingly shy, or to have had an unhappy experience in my marriage, or whatever. And you'll have this sorry, that's not the same as a flaw, is it? That's the sort of problem that's in their life. But their problem, would be more like they tend to try to please everybody. So they never speak their mind. And that happens in the house party. Beth, the central character there, she's a great people pleaser. And suddenly she's put into the position of having to find a murderer amongst their very close group of friends, and slowly fall out with quite a lot of people who don't like her asking questions and have been very happy with her being this nice, quiet person, mumsy type person. And suddenly, but she's got a secret underneath, so she's telling them all that, come on, and she learns through that she also has to share her private life as well, well, her secret to her husband, which should be kept from her husband all their married life. So they sort of, the character's arc problem often relates in some way to the main theme of the book.
Well, and you're so right that the flaw of a character it's often what we relate to, isn't it? If you've got a character who's all smiley, happy, like goes and does everything perfectly all the time, none of us can relate to that because we're all a bit of a mess, aren't we? So
it's
good to have those flaws that we can kind of pick up on and go, oh yeah, I know exactly what that's like.
Yes, I think so. Because like in The Island, Juliet is one of 4 sisters, and she's actually the second sister down of the 4, but she's always acted as the big sister, and she's been away, and she comes back thinking everybody is just sort of somehow just been sitting there waiting for her, really, and they haven't. They've all moved on, and they've grown up and got more independent, and all sorts of things have happened. And it's about her finding out she doesn't know everybody like she thinks she does, really.
And Liz has just asked, do you plan a character arc? Because you talked about sort of the arc of the character. Do you plan that for all of the characters or just the main character?
I think character arcs are a hard one. I'm going to be honest now. I find character arcs quite hard because I can normally do one for the main character, because you know them so well, and I think the reader wants to see them learn something through the book and change. I think I don't do one for every book, every character. No, I don't. I think I do like to see people change, but not every person in your story is going to change. Some people will stay the same, and my stories tend to be more about my main character slowly getting to know people and finding she didn't really know people at all very well. I'm fascinated by this idea that people present one thing, but they're hiding 99% of it. So it's more really about my main character looking at them and learning more and more and more about them and their secrets. And it's not always negative. It's, you know what that's saying about, nobody knows what somebody else is going through. So it's more like that, really.
And I guess in terms of like story satisfaction, when a reader gets to the end of a story, if your main character, who is the character that the story is told through, if they've grown and they've changed, and even if everyone else around them has kind of stayed the same, you still had that sort of something has sort of changed. And
well, I think in some like The Island, where you've got the 4 sisters, I would say each of those has an arc, definitely, and they change. Each of them changes through the story. I think because of the sort of book I'm writing now with a whodunit, the murderer doesn't really tend to change.
No.
You just find out more and more about. I read in this one book it should be called Why Done It, and I think you have to slowly find out why somebody has done something so extreme. Really.
Lovely. So you've got your setting, you've got your character, you've kind of figured them out. How do you then launch into your story? Where do you get the idea for the actual sort of plot from, I guess?
I think that can be quite hard, actually. I think obviously there's a structure when you're writing a murder mystery, so that you will be thinking of, first of all, your sleuth, where's she coming from, because I don't do police procedural. You'll think about your victim, and so you've got those people, so you're starting to get an idea of your story then, and why somebody is going to be murdered, really. I think somebody once said, right, with a story, with your first draft, this is what you do behind closed doors. This is what you have to really let your mind go when you're writing that first draft. And I think that's really, really important. And there's all sorts of things. Once you sit down and start trying to plot your story, there's all sorts of little voices that start saying, well, you can't write about that. Oh, that's not very nice. And, oh, so-and-so won't like it if you do that. A bit like what you were saying earlier about writing about the island or something. And you have to somehow switch those voices off. Now, I was saying to Anna, there's this book by Anna Britton, which is my very, 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 very favourite book about writing, called Anna Britton, called Bird by Bird. And it's an extraordinary book. And really, if you're only going to read one book about writing, read this. It's just amazing. And she talks, actually, she uses the phrase shitty first draft, pardon my swearing, but everybody writes one, and that's where you start, and you have to start somewhere. Now, you may have been plotting, so you have a rough idea where you're going to be starting, or you may not, but the point is you have to start. And even whether you're plotting or you're actually physically writing it, you've got to start, and you need to shut the door and shut all those voices out. And Anne Lamott, I was telling Anna that she's got this picture of all these little voices who are trying to tell you, don't do this and don't do that. She calls them little mice, but I'm going to call them little aliens because I quite like mice. Yeah, better into the analogy. But she said you take each one of those little aliens, the one that's saying, you're not up to writing that. I had the voice, you're not up to writing a whodunit. And I listened to that far too long. But you have to take that little alien, put him in a jar, and then turn the volume down, and you say, shush, I'm going to write this whodunit. There. And you know, whatever the voice is that's stopping you writing your story, turn the volume down and write it. And that's your first draft. Is written. Stephen King talks in On Writing. He talks about writing behind your first draft is behind a closed door, he says. Then you open the door when you're redrafting, because then you do have to start thinking about your audience and the people who are going to be reading it. Doesn't mean you scrap it or anything drastic like that, but it means you start shaping it in a way.
So you've kind of you've shut off the aliens, you've put them in their jars, you've kind of shut your door. And how do you launch into that story?
Well, that's why I say I plot. Now, for some reason it's hugely contentious, and I don't know why, but it is. An extremely good book. I saw somebody just asked about this book. What's the book she mentioned? It was called Anne Lamott. Is that coming up as back to front? She's Anne Lamott.
I think it's fine.
Lamott, her surname, and it's Bird by Bird. But that's her. Another really good book on plotting is by Diana Kimpton, who lives on the island, and she's written so many books herself and has vast experience and wisdom about writing. And she's written a book called Plot and Plotting, and she cuts right through all the jargon. And she says she knows. She said this huge argument about plot. So she said, let's call it planning or outlining. It's very sensible. For a lot of people, it helps, and it helps me to have a rough idea. I find with plotting, what I do before I've written the first page is I write headings. And I got this idea from Diana, actually. Rather than writing chapters, I write headings for roughly where the story's going to go. Now, that is based on the overall structure of a book, which is like a beginning, a middle, and an end. And something I didn't realise, I don't think I even realised it when I wrote my first novel, is that actually those aren't thirds. You've got 25%, 50%, 25%. So you've got your beginning, and so I'll write, because I write about 40 chapters for a book. So I tend to write first 10, then my middle, and then the end. So I've got roughly the first 10 chapters at the beginning, chapters 10 to 30 at the middle, and then 30 to 40 at the end. And that just happened. That's not hugely prescriptive. It's just the way it's worked for me, and it helps me pace things. And if I can, before I start, see that I've got enough to go through that, I think I've got enough here for a story. Novels are long. They really do go on. 90,000 words is a lot of words. So you've got to make sure you've got legs here. And I think also it means you can, for me, for example, I tend to have about 6 suspects to begin with. And it means you feed them in at the right times. And also there's certain things that people sort of expect in a whodunit, which is they expect really to have met all the characters, the main suspects, in that first 10 chapters. So, I have to have a bit of a structure to do that, and then you feed in your clues and all that sort of stuff. So I've done a fair bit of that, but as I say, once I start writing, that can all change. And I read an interesting thing earlier today, and it said the problem with plotters like me is that we can put off the writing too long, because it's the writing that's the scary bit. And it's true, you can keep a refuge in your plotting. It's a bit like sort of sitting dreaming forever about a beautiful home and not actually doing any decorating. It's eventually you're going to have to sit and look at that blank first page and think, eek! I've got to start. I've got to write.
Yeah.
I've got to write this book and see if any of this works. And that's when you start. And your first chapter, as everybody keeps telling you, is very, very important. But don't let that cripple you. It's crippled me far too much. Do you know? I think it was my second novel, I rewrote my first chapter 200 times.
Oh.
I kept breaking every rule in the book, and I just became obsessed that it had to be good. And then, of course, you start writing, and that's going to change anyway. So this is what I keep telling myself. I'm not much better, to be honest, now, but I'm trying to get better and let go of that first. You do need to have a good hook, and just get yourself a good hook, and you can polish it off. But, you know, think of people whizzing through their Kindles and things. They're going to quickly look, and they may open it, they may press the open and see the first line, and you've got to, there's like a fish, you've got to hook them in and think, oh, that sounds interesting, I want to know what happens. So you need a decent hook, you need a decent beginning to draw people in. You've got to get your characters going so people care about them, want to know what they're going to do and what's going to happen. So that's your beginning, really.
Yeah, so we talked about the beginning. Should we talk a little bit about the middle?
Now the middle, see, the middle's longer than I thought. I think that's where I found it difficult at first, because I don't know why. I was taught very well about the 25 and 50, but in my head I had them as thirds. Anyway, the middle is long. It's 50% of your book. And so what I do is I chop up that middle bit. And then if you see your 50%, which for me is at about chapter 20, you need a nice big turning point that you're building up to between 10 and, for me, between 10 and 20. Now, this sounds horribly prescriptive, but it's not really. But you are going to get into the middle of that middle, and you will lose people if you're just driveling a bit. You've got to keep up in the stakes. And like I read somewhere that the middle of Pride and Prejudice, at chapter about that, the middle, is when she turns down Darcy, and everything turns around in that book. And you'll find that in most films, you'll find it as well. You need to do something big there. I think actually in a lot of thrillers and things, they often have another body there. Things to raise the stakes, make things more interesting, so the person thinks, oh, I'm going to carry on with this. I want to finish this book and find out what happens.
And I guess that's where your plot on the wall comes in quite handy, because it's quite loose, but you can see, right, midway through, have I got that sort of almost secondary hook of like, that I've already hooked them at the start, how am I going to keep them interested at this point?
I often have a panic about 20. What am I going to do now? And then I look at it and I think, right, normally if there's a panic at 20, it's because I've not got into enough character earlier on, and I haven't developed those characters enough. And so I might have to go back and have another look through things. I do lots of going back and forth.
I was just about to say that. Do you? Because my writing a first draft is I just write the whole thing. I do not go back at all, because if I go back, I will just like you with your first chapter, I will go over it and over it, and I'd probably end up deleting it.
Right.
I'm so critical of it when I've just written it. It's so shitty. I have to just leave it behind and keep going. But you do go back and kind of edit as you go.
I do a fair bit, but I'm still got masses to do on the second draft. But there was a handy hint I heard somewhere that when you finish each day, try to think, leave it where it's somewhere where you want to, something you're quite excited about writing the next morning. Because when you wake up on a wet Monday morning, not feeling particularly like writing, if you see something there, you think, oh, good. And for me, I love writing rows and arguments. I think, oh, good. And I'm straight in there. So I tend to put a couple of headings before I finish. Say, tomorrow I'm going to do these few things. Now I might not, but at least when I open the page, it's not looking at me as if to say, dunk, carry on then.
What am I doing now?
Or I can look at my plot, but usually I try to write something to give me an idea of what I can do that day.
Lovely. So you've kind of worked through the middle, and then kind of how do you bring it to a conclusion? How do you write that ending? I've been working this last 2 weeks on the ending. I think the trouble is, endings, you're quite tired by the time you get to the end, to be honest. Sometimes you need to have a little break, and do some more housekeeping type things in the book.
if you're very tired. She's dead with feeling. And then, but the ending is so important. Don't rush it. Don't just think, let's get that out of the way, because it matters. That it brings everything together, and you sell your book short if you don't really do your best with your ending. And also, that's the last thing the reader is going to remember about your book, and decide probably whether they read the next one. People might really care about endings.
Oh, absolutely. There's a book, I'm not going to name it, but there's a book I read a little while ago. I absolutely loved it. It was a crime novel, and it got to the end, and the murderer got away with it, but also like in a really awful way. And honestly, I'm very reluctant to read any of their other books, because I'm like, if you're going to do that to me again, no.
Yeah. I think certainly in thriller, psychological drama type things, there is this huge pressure, and this is a bit of a contentious one here now, about twists. I think the temptation, and I love a twist. I love a twist, but you have to know where to put them, how to put them, and when to stop. I have to say that sometimes I feel that the twists, I'm satisfied, I've finished, we've got there, and then they have to add another one. I've seen it on dramas on television and in books, and I think twists really, really matter, but it's not all about the twists, and you don't have to keep popping them out like rabbits out of a hat. I think they need to fit into your story and make sense. They have to have been foreshadowed. I've got a real thing about this. You can't just bring out a surprise about anything, really. People should be able. The ideal twist to me, the dream twist, is for somebody to go, why didn't I see that coming? Of course, they did this, they did that, I should have seen it. That to me is the dream twist, when somebody can say, should have seen it.
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it, when there's,
it's hard to do, but that's what you're trying to do.
Well, it's hard to know how much. I guess it's that middle section, isn't it, and even the start, where you're figuring out, right, what information do I need to kind of leak into these bits so that it's kind of there, but also like, I don't want them to figure it out.
Actually, Agatha Christie had a rule of, she put her main clues, and you can notice if you start reading her books, as a fourth or fifth item in a conversation, because she thinks people have had enough after 3 and they start skimming.
That's clever.
She did a lot of it.
Intentionally boring the readers.
If you ever see a big clump of anything in an Agatha Christie, read it, because in the middle of that, she'll have put one of the main clues.
Wow. That's so clever. And I guess it makes some readers feel really good about themselves, because they actually do read those bits and they're like, I totally know what's going on.
You get such different sorts of readers, and people are incredibly savvy now. They really, we watch really complex stuff on telly now, things like Line and Judy things, there's so many layers to them, and you've got to really, and that comes into the plotting and planning and going the back and the forward to try and make sure it's all there, but not too obvious. Not easy.
And I guess because you've done all your plotting, when you've ended. Do you feel sort of fairly confident in your ending, if that makes sense?
Yes, I think it's very hard ending sometimes. I know you'll know from things like Death in Paradise and all those sorts of things, where the big reveal at the end. But that big reveal, you may have many layers, and you have to feed in your ending. You can't just have it all in one scene, because there's normally too much. But I do know when I've come to an end, really, and when I think, I think now's the time, because normally the clues becomes more and more obvious, and it's time to reveal everything before people guess.
Yeah, definitely, because there starts to be a bit, people are very much more working it out towards the end, aren't they? They're like, I know the reveal's coming, so I'm going to try and figure it out. So you've got to get there before. Well,
I tried to help. I tried to have narrowed down, because I tend to start with about 6 suspects, but I tend to try to narrow it down to 3 or 4, maybe 3 by the end. So things are building up, and that's the whole raising the stakes things. You sort of, and you have to get this tension going of the murderer feeling they're getting, and they get more threatening, and that's how you. There was a quote I said to Anna another time. Charles Dickens said, "Make them cry, make them laugh, make them wait." And I think waiting is about tension, and I have a temptation to say too much too soon. But you need to feed things in slowly and gradually take people there, so they're waiting, and you want them like this thing.
Yeah, you want, desperate to know.
That's what you're hoping.
Oh, that's such a great quote. I'd love to chat a bit about your like routines and habits. We've had a question. We've had a question from Erin that just says, how long does it take you to write a 90,000 word draft?
It takes me a year to write a book, really. This book, although this has taken me 11 months, it's a bit quicker. I know there's people who write books a lot quicker than that.
And Mary, sorry, is that just your first draft? It takes a year, or is that the whole completed thing?
Well, it's taken me 11 months on this book now to write from the very first idea to it being a decent enough draft to send to my editor.
Okay.
So I probably redrafted this one 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
In that time. But I mean, I'm fortunate that I write full time and I write every day, so I can do it. But as I say, there are people who write more. It just, I think we're all different, and you just have to work at your pace.
Do you have any idea of how many sort of words or pages you write a day, or kind of? Yeah,
I don't really go by that. It's one of those things. I know some people, there's lots of people actually who recommend, say, 2,000 a day, which would be like a chapter for me a day. But I found I was getting really discouraged if I couldn't do that. I couldn't do NaNoWrite. It's just not me. The November thing where you write a month. I would just feel such a failure. And for me, I don't see the point in just writing down words for the sake of it. They have to feed the story and be part of things and make sense to me. So I don't actually write I don't really have many goals, really. I just sit down and write every day and try and get on with it.
That's so lovely, though. It's almost sort of like unfettered by, you must do this, you must do that, you must do that. Just sit and write and see what happens with that day.
Well, yes, I know. I think once I get into editing, I'm stricter, and I start saying, right, you edit, you jolly well edit 2-3 chapters now before you watch the rerun of Bake Off.
Yes. Important to have priorities.
Get your priorities sorted out.
Yeah. So you said that you're a full-time writer. Can you tell us, do you have an average day? What would an average day of writing for you look like?
Well, I feed the cat. I write in the mornings mainly. I don't get up at an unearthly hour. There are people who do that sort of thing, but I don't. I get up normal time.
Good on them.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are people who are working, and I know, bless them, they're working from 8 till 10 every evening. I don't do that. I work in the mornings mainly, and sometimes in the afternoons as well. Well, actually, I often work in the afternoons as well. But, I've got family and dentists and all the usual stuff that people have. So I think what I would say, it's interesting, I've talked to a few people who've started working full-time home, and people who aren't working full-time, and I'm in no way diminishing the amazing thing they do by writing novels at night and these sorts of things. But when you're home all day, you have to find some sort of structure and some sort of priority for your writing, because for a lot of people, they'll ring up any time, and it's best will in the world, but people, you're not in an office, so you know, and actually it's a lovely thing that you can chat to people at any time in the day, but there are sometimes you have to say, actually, do you mind if I speak to you in an hour and I'll just finish this chapter? And I don't know anybody who might say, go, oh, sorry, I didn't think we were working, you know. And because you have to, what is it I'm trying to say? By you respecting your writing, other people will respect it as well. You have to say, this is serious to me now, and I care about this, and I want to give it time. And you know, just like anybody else going to an office or whatever, I want to give my work my time and my concentration now. And
definitely. I have a paper diary, and I tend to write my writing sessions in there. I think it's something, I don't know if it's something that Stephen King like advise people to do, is to actually write it in as like an appointment almost, and you've got to make that appointment. So if someone says, oh, can we go have coffee that morning, you're like, nope, I've got a thing I'm already doing, it's written down.
Oh, Anna, I think I might try that. I've never done that.
Wow, I've passed on some wisdom.
No, thank you. I think that's the next one.
It's not my idea, so
I think it's all over the place. So I think that's really sensible, because I think to say, oh, it's written in my diary, a good thing. Yeah,
well, and it's kind of like an excuse as well, because even if it like sometimes I feel a little bit like, I don't know, pretentious, being like, oh no, I'm writing, I can't possibly come out. But actually I can just say, oh, sorry, I'm busy. And I don't feel like I'm lying because it's written in my diary.
In my diary. Yeah, no, that sounds brilliant. Yeah.
Lovely. So I'd really love to chat loads more to you, but I'm really aware that we are coming up to the end, so I'm just going to ask a few more questions. If anyone has any questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll kind of rattle through them. Mary, can you tell me your greatest strength as a writer? I told you were allowed to talk about weaknesses. We'll do that in a minute, but you have to talk about your strengths first. To
be honest, I think my strength, although I talk a bit flippantly sometimes, is that I work really, really hard. I do work very, I read about writing, or I think maybe coming to writing later, I knew I had a lot to do to learn, and I love learning about writing and improving my skill. And so I work really hard, and I spend 7 days a week probably, I'm doing some writing and trying to get better and make my books more enjoyable for people to read. So I that's naturally in me, and I think it's my strength. I think I work really hard.
That's such a lovely strength, and I think that's something that like it is, so that's what writing is, isn't it? It's hard graft sometimes, and you do have to work hard at it. And so now we can talk about your weaknesses, which you'll probably be much more comfortable with.
I think you become aware of different things at different stages in your writing, really. And I think recently I've been working more on dialogue. I think as I have quite a lot of dialogue in the sort of books I'm writing, and I'm aware of dialogue, and I've been reading books about dialogue, and I'll save the hint. A really good hint I learned recently about writing dialogues, and because you can't have people just sitting there talking in a vacuum, just back and forth, because that becomes a bit weird. Although it's nice and easy to write, you can't do it, because you have to keep putting people within a situation for your reader to stay in the book, really. And somebody suggested, watching a film, switch down the volume and just watch what people are doing as they're talking, and it gives you ideas so that people aren't just drinking a cup of coffee, which I was doing an awful lot of, either coffee or wine, and they can do more things than just drink a drink. And so she took a sip and then she said she could actually do a lot of other things as well. And other mannerisms, things that will show how she's feeling, what she's thinking about. She might answer her phone, she might do, if she's getting a bit bored, or she might do something to distract somebody, all sorts of things. But that's a little hint. Turn down the volume and watch what people are doing while two people are talking, what their bodily movements are. If you and I
such a good hint. I love that. I love that tip. So, but you'd say your dialogue is sort of, you feel like you're getting stronger as you sort of learn more.
Yeah, and I've read some, somebody called Rain Hall has written a whole raft of books about writing, and her books I really would recommend. If you want to.
Was that Rain Hall?
Rain, Rayne Hall.
Ooh, okay.
And she's written lots of individual books on dialogue. I recently read her one on, I think it was called The Word Diet or something, but it was about chopping out a lot of unnecessary dialogue, not dialogue, but bits of pieces. I say things like really and just and things too many times. Well, now you're all going to look for them now.
I know. We'll look for them in there and highlight them.
Yeah, she writes lots of really practical short books about things that work. Actually, she's good.
Lovely. So we're coming to an end now, and I'd love to just finish with, like, if you could give one piece of advice that you would give to another writer, maybe like a new writer, what would your advice be to them?
Have confidence and write. I think don't keep putting off writing. Start with writing something you know about. Just write short stories about things you know about, but try to write every day. And it is a skill that you can learn, and you get better at. And so just keep working at it. If you really want to do it, find a good course. It's more difficult to find them in colleges and things now, but online there's courses. Just find things that are positive and encouraging, and go for it. Just go for it, and write something every day. Find some friends who are writing as well, because I think it can be a bit lonely and a bit discouraging. You need to find people who are enthusiastic and love it as well.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Mary. That's such a lovely point to leave it on. And thank you for such a great session. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful, and thank you ever so much for everybody who's come. It's really kind of you to give up your time to come listen. Thank you.